Taking a deep dive on Andrew Rohde and why I think he's a really strong fit for this Wisconsin Badgers basketball offense. That's next. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Harings. Really do appreciate you being here, for being an everydayer, for making this one of your first listens. Y'all are incredible. Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today's episode, deep dive, Andrew Rohde, offensive fit, defensive fit on the roster, big picture thoughts. And to do that, we always bring in the man, Coach Scothier is joining the show again. Always excited for these, man. I love these deep dives. I want to start here. Andrew Rohde comes in. We're going to start with the offensive fit. 6'6" guy, Wisconsin native, Virginia the last year, 1 year of eligibility left. What do you like, just big picture, about the offensive fit with Rodie coming in?
Like you said, Ryan, I think it's a really good fit. What I love is his size, 6'6", 200. We talked about with Boyd when we deep dove on him. I love the power conference experience. 3-year starter. I know he started at St. Thomas in the Summit League, but then, 2 years at UVA. Just experience. You can't replace experience. And he has size, and he can shoot the ball. He's a plus passer. I'm sure we'll get into his defensive side of things, but he's a solid defender. He's just a really good fit, especially how, we've discussed in the past how the Badgers want to space the floor and how, offensively, how they want to play. He's just a perfect fit for that because, all the other things we just discussed, bottom line is he can flat out stroke the ball from three. So, it's just with the other pieces with the offense, I think it's a perfect fit for the Badgers.
Yeah, let me throw some numbers up here. 31 minutes a game last year, 77% from the line, 41% from three, also 4.3 assists per game. One of the things I really liked about him is he's going to give you, because you're bringing in Nick Boyd. He's going to be your point guard, your primary initiator. But this gives you somebody that if Nick Boyd is running action on one side of the court, you can skip it over, you can swing it over to Rody, and Rody can initiate on the second side. And really, when you get defenses scrambling to recover and you have a secondary playmaker, I think there's going to be situations with the spacing, the shooting, and multiple people like Rody who can pass the ball. I think you're going to put some defenses in a blender with this.
No question about it. I mean, you alluded to his stats. I mean, he was a 43, 41, 77 split guy. We talked about Tanjay almost got that, the ultimate pinnacle of being a 50, 40, 90 guy. Rody's not that far off from those numbers, not that, expect him to put it, but just shows his versatility. And to your point you're alluding to, Ryan, offensively, get in on the second side. He actually has a really good crossover. His right to left crossover, he has a double crossover move where he really prefers to get to his left hand off the bounce, where he can get to that mid-range area where he pulls up or he drops a float piece on the defender because of that size, that 6'6" with a plus wingspan that he has. So to your point, swinging the ball over to him, creating on the second side with his decision making, because his shooting ability. So defenders are going to have to respect his shooting first. It's going to open up space for other people, and then he can off the bounce create some plays. And like you said, he's a really good passer. He's very skilled. You start to get that defense on the second and third side and put the ball in his hands. Now you really have something offensively. It's hard. It's going to be really hard to key or load up on the Badgers, offensively, because they're gonna the spacing, and they have multiple weapons that are going to be very skilled, that can not only hit a shot but make the right basketball play and are really good passers.
Yeah, and I want to talk to shooting for a second because 42% last year. High mark in his career, over the career, he's a 33% shooter over the course of his career. When you watch film on him, the shot looks for real. That doesn't feel like a mirage to me. It feels like a consistent release point. There's good balance. He's finding space. There's also really the ability to really stretch the defense, create gravity. He can hit shots several feet behind that three-point line to really stretch a defense out. But any concern on your end that last year's shooting percentage was maybe inflated, a bit of a mirage, not in line with his career numbers?
Not necessarily, because I know his first year at UVA, he had an off. He was only 29% from the field, 25 from three. But if you look at his numbers at St. Thomas, he was 44 from the field and 32 from three. So I would think his floor is probably 30%. This year, talking about a Mirage 41 is probably on the high end, but I think, things are never as good as you think they are. They're never as bad. So if he falls in the middle, I mean, you're looking at 35, 36% from three. That's above average. You can do a lot of stuff with it. And to your point, the other reason you're spot on why I don't think it's a mirage, if you watch his release and just his form, he is short, quick, and compact to his shot. So what I mean by that is he catches the ball really high, and he has a quick and a short release. So I always like to say catch high, shoot high. So he gets it off in a split second. There's not a lot of mechanics to his shot because it's so short and compact with a high release, and also being 6'6". He doesn't really have to do a lot to get a shot over a defender. So just based on, watching his form and his shot and stuff, I don't think it's a mirage because, when you have a short, quick release like that, mechanically it's hard to get out of whack per se because it's short and compact.
Yeah, I'll give you another one that I liked about him watching film. He moves really intelligently to space. He finds space constantly, fading to the corner, lifting from the corner, depending on ball action. He's always just shifting a little, moving a little. He's not stationary. You can tell there's a bit of basketball IQ that comes along with him that I really liked watching him on film.
Yeah, you actually just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say he has a really high basketball IQ. Just like you said, to watching him move, how he spaces the floor, you could see him with McNeely at Virginia. They had really good verbal and nonverbal communication on the floor that you could always see them, hand gestures and stuff, always talking about spacing, creating space between each other. So you can tell he has a really good basketball feel and IQ, which I think, fit is a huge weapon as well. And I just think, and that's what we talked about earlier, the experience factor that, I just think it's a really good piece that he's just going to bring another element to the Badgers from an offensive standpoint because of his feel and his capabilities with that spacing. And he is quick enough and good enough off the bounce where he can, now he's not going to get off the bounce, take somebody to the rim. And, one of the weaknesses, I think he struggles to finish at the rim, but he's also with that basketball IQ comes in. He knows what spot he needs to get to, either to get a shot off, whether it's a pull up or a floater, or to get to a spot where he can make a play for somebody else. And that's not something you can really teach a basketball player, especially on this level. They either have it or they don't. And like you said, by his career assist number and his turnover to assist ratio, he led the ACC in league play last year with a 3.4 assist to turnover ratio. Just shows you to his basketball intelligence, and he knows how to make the right basketball play. And that's invaluable, as a coaching staff and for a basketball team.
Yeah, I love that you brought it up a couple times. He's playing at Virginia. He's playing in the ACC. When you look at these synergy numbers, when you watch the film, these are real. You're not having to project, well, he was playing at Cal State Fullerton or he was playing at Albany, and how's this going to work at this level? We know because the dude was playing at Virginia. And if you look at the synergy numbers, 99th percentile in spot-up shooting, 74th percentile off screens, 89th percentile jump shots against ACC competition. That's going to translate.
Absolutely, Ryan. You made an absolutely great point in the sense, we talked about last year when we were doing this at this time of the year, when we're talking about Cameron, when we're talking about Hunter, and we're talking about Amos. And one of the things you and I both, talked about and we thought might be an issue is how does that translate, to a level or two levels above, playing in lower level leagues to the Big Ten. Now, with Rody, you don't have to do that. I know the ACC is not at the level per se of the Big Ten, but it's a power conference, and he's going against power guys every night. So, and actually, the assist to turnover ratio I alluded to, like for the season, it was 2.4, but he raised that by another point in the ACC, in conference play. So that's 20 conference games of against elite athletes and talent. So again, we don't have to make a projection or question is his game going to be translatable, because obviously it is from who he played against and where he played.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. We're going to take a quick break. Friends of the show, come back. We're going to talk if there's any offensive concerns, and then get into the defensive fit with Andrew Rohde come over to the Badgers. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick second. Our friends of the show over at Monarch Money. Do you ever sit and just, I don't know, wonder, where did my money go? Listen, Ryan does that a lot, speaking in first person, because my money goes in a lot of places that sometimes it probably shouldn't. My Steam account, maybe I need to go to the gas station, get some nachos. The lady at the gas station, at our local gas station, actually was like, I need to get you a rewards card, because every time you come in here and you say you don't need one, you would have saved hundreds of dollars on this rewards card with all the crap that you buy here. I said, probably about time. Monarch Money is here for me to help me figure out where those money leaks are going. It's here for you as well. It's not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. Track all of your accounts, investments, spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money and let's start building wealth. Let's start investing in our future. So it gives you insights, all in one convenience. You can collaborate with your partners. You can set goals, track all your spendings, all your accounts, stay on the same page without the stress. And right now, they're going to save you even more money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, let's jump back into this with Coach. Talk a little bit about any concerns on the offensive side. And Coach, I know you kind of hit on one of them. That's kind of where I was going to go as well. So I'll let you finish on that one. Just the ability to maybe finish at the rim, maybe get it all the way to the rack.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I was going to say, and I alluded to it a little earlier, is, I don't think he's a really good finisher at the rim, but I think he knows that, so he doesn't force. Like I said, he usually stops in that 8 to 10 foot range to either get to a floater or pull up because of his 6'6" frame and his plus wingspan. But I do think, finishing at the rim is an issue, especially over size and length. And then the other thing I would just say is, he's not a plus athlete. I wouldn't say he's a bad athlete or whatever, but he's not a plus athlete. So it's going to be difficult when he's playing against more athletic, longer guys for him. He's not going to really create plays per se, getting buckets off the bounce. So I just think, those two things in terms of, weaknesses offensively is, creating off the bounce and getting to the rim and finishing over size and length.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the finishing over size and length. And you can tell, again, it goes back to his IQ. I think you nailed this again. He knows it, because when he gets down there, it's pump fake, pump fake, pump fake, reverse pivot, right? He understands that's a limitation. And I think experienced athletic defenders are going to give him some trouble. The younger guys who'll just jump at a pump fake, I think he'll exploit those guys with his IQ. But the older, more experienced guys that also have that athletic edge on him, I think are going to give him some trouble if he's trying to get to the rim, get to the paint. I'll give you another one. He's a solid ball handler, and I don't know if this is necessarily a concern, but pressure can limit him. He can handle it under pressure, but he can't exploit pressure. And there's a difference in that layer. Some guards can do it. He kind of gets that position where he's going to get his body between him and the defender, but in that sense, he limits his ability to exploit that type of pressure as well.
No, that's a really good, I failed to mention that earlier, and it's a really good catch by you, because, there's a lot of times when he has the ball up in the perimeter and a defender crawls up into him, they kind of push him away from the basket. He has to turn his back to pressure a little bit, and they push him, NBA line plus out away from the basket. So that's, a really good, point that you bring up with you is, I think if defender, more athletic, longer defenders crawl into him, I don't think he's overly comfortable doing that. To our point, he's not going to break people off the bounce, and get to the rim and stuff. So I do think if defenders crawl into him and stuff, that is definitely one of the not a strength of his game.
Yep, I'd agree there. Let's talk defense. A spot where the Badgers needed to get a little bit better. You and I have talked several times. He scored 89 points and lost in March. Defense could use a jolt here. What do you think of Rody defensively, big picture, before we dive into the nuance of his game?
Big picture, does he fix their weakness that you and I have talked about over and over again? Defensively, no. Is he a poor defender? No. I think he's solid. I would actually say I would put him, he's probably a similar, and I'll be interested to see your opinion on this, Ryan, but I think he's a similar defender to Max. I think quicker guys with a little juice to them and a little change of direction and pace could give him problems. But I think he's back to his basketball IQ we talk about. I think he's really good playing angles. He knows how to cut people off with angles and uses his length and size a little bit to probably get himself out of some bad situations defensively. And actually watching him move laterally when guarding on the ball, his feet are pretty good. I think initially he might get beat by a half a step by the primary ball handler. But again, due to his basketball intelligence and stuff, I think he does a really good job of moving his feet and picking out a spot in front of the defender to kind of cut him off. So they get a little bit penetration, but they don't get deep penetration on him. And I think he's really solid with that. And he has you can tell he's been real well coached, back in high school in his previous stops. Obviously, you go into Virginia, you got to be a good defender because, obviously Coach Bennett wasn't there this year, but I mean, that's their defense at first. So obviously he wouldn't have been there if he wasn't a good defender. So I think he's solid, and I think to comparing him to Max, obviously Max wasn't 6'6". So, I think because on his closeouts and stuff, he does a really good job contesting shots and using that 6'6" length to really, he's pretty good and aggressive on his closeouts. So I think that will help the Badgers. But again, from overall elevating them from a defensive standpoint, I don't think he does that.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with you. In fact, one of the things I wrote down was plays really, really well with his angles defensively. You and I are on the same page there. It's a situation where I feel like he's like a B type defender. He's not an A. He's not a point of attack guy. He's not an elite guy, but he plays really, really intelligently. The one thing he does is he uses his bodies, his hands really well. He doesn't foul at a high rate while still contesting shots. His foul rate is I think he averaged 1.7 fouls per game while still playing into the body of people. He really understands how to keep his hands out, but keep his body engaged. I like that aspect of his game. And then on the perimeter side, 94th percentile defensively spot up shooting. I think your Max point is great because he's maxed with 3 or 4 more inches of length, Which really is going to help you on the perimeter for this Badgers defense.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned his hands, and that was one note I had here that I failed to mention. He shows it on film. He has quick hands. His freshman year at St. Thomas, he averaged 1.7 steals per game. He actually has 104 steals in his career. I think he's played something like 84 career games. So again, he's 1.02 steals per game. You're talking that in the Summit League, a good league, and then you're talking 2 years in the ACC. So, he does have quick, active hands. A lot of guys have length or 6'6", but they don't really play to their size. He's a guy who plays to his size. He's very, like you said, very active hands, and he uses them really well. So I think, again, that makes him, a average to above average defender.
Do you think because we've talked a lot about him in Klesmit, and this might be a topic for the next segment here where we're going to talk big picture, but I guess we're just going to hit it now because I brought it up. But nominally in the roster and the rotation, he's replacing Tanjay. He's going to play the 3 more or less. Boyd's coming in to play the 1. It's a little positionless. I don't want to get too, typecast into specific spots. Is he a better or worse defender than Tanjay, do you think?
Me personally, I think he's a better defender for Tanjay because I think the staff did a really good job kind of hiding Tanjay defensively. I don't think with Rody, I don't think you have to hide him. I think whatever you need him to match up on, whether it's a bigger guy because of his 6'6", and we talked about his active hand and using his length, and now obviously he can't really guard a PG or whatever, but against normal other wings, 2, 3, 4 types, we talked about how looks like they really want to get to where they're going to switch, at minimum 1 through 4, like they did this year. I think Obviously, every team would like to be able to switch 1 through 5. I think you could do that with him. And so I think one of the other things, I know this is per se not defensively, but I think overall fit him is he's really good. He knows how to use screens. So like with spacing and stuff like that, I think with the staff and Penny and stuff, I think they're going to he's a professional in how to come off and use screens. And he is a really good cutter off the ball. And if you notice the Badgers, especially when they got it going last year offensively, they became a really good cutting team off the ball. And I think Rody does that really well. So again, we talk about offensively how they want to space you. With that threat, every 5 guys that can shoot it, with that cutting ability, because the Badgers really started cutting up teams late in the second half of the year. And that was one dimension that they've added to their offense that I really like. And I think he's a good fit for that.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because it's, again, all tying into that high IQ, high floor type of kid that you're bringing in. We're going to take a quick second here, friends of the show. Come back, talk about kind of the overall fit on the roster. Is this your 3rd or 4th option offensively? Does that work? And then some of that defensive versatility that Coach is alluding to. All that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick second for our friends of the show. And as always, a quick second to say thank you for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. All right, let me ask you this one, because I think you started to hit on it, and I've been talking about it a little bit. You look at Boyd, who's 6'3", Blackwell, who's a strong shooting guard, Rody, who's 6'6". And by the way, I don't even think we talked about it in the previous segment. The more I watched him on film defensively, the more I kind of liked him. I didn't expect to like him that much until I dove into the film. Then you have a Rapp who's 6'11", who can move decently. Nolan Winter is going to be a 7-footer with mobility. This is going to be a really switchable team. Then you look at a Braden Carrington, who we haven't even got to. They bring him from Tulsa. He's a 6'4" guard with some length. I think they're just going to be really switchable, man, to the much more so than last year, where you had a Crowell, you had Klesman, who wasn't big enough, you had Kamari McGee coming off the bench. I think that's the mode this year defensively, and I think they could have a lot of success with the pieces they brought in.
I agree. You talk about the size of those guys. I mean, when you're basically 6'3" or better at every position, I think that gives you great versatility, especially in the Big Ten. Not the most athletic league. I mean, there are teams that are athletic, be more athletic than the Badgers, but it's not going to be an overly athletic, up and down league. It's, Big Ten's going to be like the Big Ten that we're used to seeing. So that versatility, that length, I think the Badgers, there's not going to be any matchups they got to worry about. Like, as much as we liked Kamari, and Kamari, was a good defender and stuff, he was just at a size where teams could take advantage of that. It's hard, it's hard when you're that small, especially if you're playing against bigger teams can exploit that. And it's going to be hard to exploit the Badgers because not only, like you said, the size from a height standpoint, but a lot of these guys we dove into and we talked about, they're, in Blackwell's case, they have plus wingspans. So what I mean by that means they're actually longer in their length than they are their listed size. So again, to that versatility you talk about defensively, I think it's going to be a huge advantage for the Badgers.
Let me ask you this, and not suggesting this is going to happen a lot last year, but we've seen Greg Gard play more zone, at least be open to it. With this group of team, the wingspans, and then I think you look at Boyd's a high IQ guy. Blackwell's a high IQ guy. Winter can cover a lot of ground. I don't really know about Rapp yet, but certainly Rody is a high IQ guy that can cover ground. Would this be a good zone team, you think?
That's a really good thought you brought up. I didn't really think about it because I'm still kind of used to guard refusing to play any possessions of zone, and obviously he did a good job mixing it in here and there. That's a really good point. I think with, like you said, with their IQ and the size, I think if they needed to go to zone or they worked on zone, I think they could really shrink the floor. And I think you start playing some of those teams, like if Michigan State this past year wasn't a great perimeter shooting team, like UCLA, some teams like that might have more athleticism than you, but aren't great from the perimeter. I mean, I think that's a really good point you bring up, Ryan, that could give them some more versatility and give the staff some more options to kind of mix things up, or, depending on the matchup, what they like. It's a really good thought that I didn't really consider, that they could provide just another weapon, another wrinkle for the staff to really dive into and use to their to their effectiveness.
And I bet you now that that door is open for them to play more zone, it's something they'll think about. But I mean, obviously, we both know this is still primarily a man-to-man team. That's never going to change. And I'm not suggesting it should, by the way. How about offensively? I'm curious with your take on this because we've talked a lot about positionless. There's a lot of guys on this offense that can shoot, that can space, that can dribble. Do we focus too much on he's a 3, this guy's a 1? Is this offense just going to flow, pick and roll side to side, get the ball in playmakers' hands, space the floor, and shoot?
I think so. I mean, to your point, I think that really what I think why I agree with you and why I think you're spot on with that point is I think it's because you have Boyd. So you have a point guard, which, I know Klesman did a really nice job with it last year, but wasn't a point guard. Blackwell, we've talked about it. I think he's going to be much better off. It's going to help him just from his overall game and take some pressure off being more of a 2 or a 3, a wing, than having the ball in his hands all the time. I just think, to your point, I think it's more positionless, but knowing that you have that true point guard. So whether, the Badgers, whether it's a 2, 3, or 4, and even when Winter's in the game, we both agree that it's obvious they're planning on playing Winter as their 5. But other than Boyd, you can play a lot of those guys 2, 3, and 4. They're all interchangeable, right? Because Rapp, you and I both agree he's not a 5, but he's 6'11", and he shoots it like a 2, especially in transition. Like he can run the wing and he's going to let it fly. Rody can do that. Now Winter isn't a 3 or a 2, obviously, but Winter can be a stretch 4. And I think they're going to use them as a stretch 5. To your point, I think they could give a lot of teams problems because they are positionalists for the most part, but they have that primary ball handler, which they did not have last year. They did a really good job supplementing it and, working around it. But I just think, just me from a coaching standpoint, I think you're always better off if you have a true PG.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. They did a good job of supplementing it, working around it, but there's no substituting for it. Ultimately, there's no substitute for an experienced point guard. There just isn't. And they still made it work, but I think it's better if you have one. And I'll tell you the other reason I kind of like the Rody pickup is I've been thinking about this the last couple of days. There's going to be hopefully no injuries, right? But there's going to be times where a Boyd is going to be on the bench. I think you could stagger these two, and then Rody leads the second. Like Rody's the point guard leading when Boyd is out sitting on the bench getting his 10 minutes of blow. I think that works for me.
Absolutely. And I think another part is him being 6'6". The other teams are going to have to figure out who do they guard him with. So say if you guard Rody with a guy similar size, whether it's 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", well, that guy probably isn't going to be able to put great pressure on him. So you could run Rody at the 1 when Boyd's out because the defender that's going to be on him isn't going to really be able to get into him and speed him up. So again, it takes that versatility away, from the defense because Rody, I agree with you, has that skill set where in a pinch or whatever, because I think it's going to be, you're not going to really put a little guy, a quick pest on Rody defensively because then he's just going to shoot threes over you all game long. So, I really like that thought on your part of bringing that up that, I think in a pinch, and obviously you got Blackwell that can do it. I know we'll do it down the road. We'll get into Carrington or what, and stuff like that. But again, they had that versatility where they can supplement and mix and match and kind of use, okay, how is our opponent matching up to us? And if we need to put somebody as a supplement at the point, they have options.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the versatility here is fun. Coach, man, as always, I think that was a great deep dive. Offensive, defensive. It feels like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I really like this pickup. I think it's a high floor guy who's going to fit in pretty seamlessly. I mean, just to wrap it all up, I think we both really like this pickup for the Badgers.
I think it's a really solid pickup for the Badgers, and especially, obviously, and you and I have talked about this. You're not, I know we talk about it and people talk about it. you're not going to be able to replace Tanjay. I mean, he was a second-team All-American. You just, that doesn't happen very often. I mean, they struck gold with him and stuff, but another solid piece, power conference guy, experienced. I think he fits in really well. I like the pieces. I see what the philosophy is that the Badgers are doing, and I think they still have some work to do, but, all in all, with what they've lost, I think that, another really good piece.
Yep, I agree. Always, thank you to Coach Gotti for jumping on. Thank you for everybody who's going to watch this. Really do appreciate it. Bunch of content coming up this week. We have Coach Anderson to talk spring football. We got Nick Bruzewitz coming on the show. Rising media star Nick Bruzewitz to talk spring football as well. All that and more on Wisconsin. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will definitely talk to you later.